Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, State Attorney General Kris Mayes joins us to discuss her part in the recent Supreme Court decision striking down President Trump's tariff program. Also tonight, it's National Heart Month. We'll hear about Phoenix Children's Center for Heart Care. And a new report looks at chronic absenteeism among Arizona school kids. Those stories and more next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your public television station.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. Arizona Attorney General Kris Mayes helped lead a number of states in successfully overturning President Trump's tariff program by way of a recent U.S. Supreme Court decision. This as Arizona Senate Republicans passed a resolution calling for Mayes to step down in response to her comments about ICE agents and the state's Stand Your Ground law. Joining us now to talk about these and other issues, there she is, Arizona Attorney General Kris Mayes. Good to see you.
Hi, Ted. Good to be with you.
Thanks for coming in. We got a whole lot to talk to you about here.
Yeah.
Let's start with the Supreme Court decision. Arizona and Oregon led the way on this one, correct?
Yeah, so I co-led this lawsuit with the Attorney General of Oregon, Dan Rayfield, but we were joined by 10 other states, and we took it all the way to the United States Supreme Court. We knew that those tariffs were illegal. Trump had tried to file them under this law called IEEPA, and we won in the Court of International Trade and then in the appellate court, and then we won in front of the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court sent a very strong message, I think, that, you know, tariffs are taxes and that the power to tax the American people rests with Congress. And so you had, you know, people like John Roberts and Neil Gorsuch saying to Donald Trump, no, hold on. You can't do this.
You said this was about the rule of law and American democracy. I got the rule of law. American democracy means what, through Congress?
Yeah, it means the separation of powers. I mean, fundamentally, this lawsuit, as well as all of the 36 lawsuits that I have now filed against the Trump administration, are about essentially the separation of powers. Congress has, in this case of tariffs, has the power to tariff. You know, and no president, whether it's Donald Trump or some future Democratic president, has the ability to seize that power and levy tariffs on the American people. Let's remember, these tariffs, Ted, cost the average American family $1,300 in additional costs. And, you know, they deserve that money back, quite frankly, and businesses probably are definitely due refunds as well.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because in dissent, Justice Kavanaugh said that this would create a, quote, mess in terms of figuring out who gets the money, where it goes, how it gets there. And that's one of the reasons, and one of the biggest reasons, he voted against this. Does he have a bit of a point?
Not really. When you violate the Constitution, it's messy. The aftermath of that is messy, and that is true. I mean, it is a mess, and we are going to have to, you know, the Trump administration needs to be setting up a refund process. They probably should do that through Customs and Border Protection, CBP, which is the entity that actually brings in the tariffs. Doesn't look like the Trump administration is doing that. And of course, as you know, the next day he threw a temper tantrum and then assessed a 15% worldwide tariff, which is time limited. Not sure whether it's legal, but it's definitely time limited. So he just seems, you know, bent on really hurting the American people.
Justice Kavanaugh also mentioned that the judiciary shouldn't interfere with the president's foreign policy. And of course, the president was saying that he sees trade deficits, international drug trafficking. These are the sorts of emergency things that he is allowed to address.
Yeah, it was a strange decision, and obviously, you know, six justices disagreed with him. So, look, foreign policy, is the president engaged in foreign policy in certain respects? Of course. But, you know, our founding fathers in our Constitution made it clear that tariffs, the power to tariff and tax, the power of the purse resides with Congress, and that's very clear. And then you look at IEEPA, tariffs are not, Ted, even mentioned in that law. So it was a pretty clear decision, and the people of Arizona will benefit from this.
But last point on this is regarding IEEPA and how it wasn't mentioned, tariffs weren't mentioned. However, an unusual and extraordinary threat is mentioned, and if the president sees this, and I ask this question because the Supreme Court has given him a lot of leeway and a lot of room to move, because if he sees a problem, if he sees a threat. Were you somewhat surprised by the decision?
Not after I attended the oral arguments, because it became very, very clear from what they were saying, even the conservative justices, that they saw this illegal seizure of power by the president as very dangerous. One of the justices, I think it was Gorsuch, said, well, what if a future Democratic president decides that he wants to tariff every country on the planet? Because those countries, in his or her mind, aren't doing enough on climate change. And so you can start to see the wheels moving in people's heads like, oh, well, we wouldn't want that either, would we? So this is about the Constitution and the rule of law, and it was a great victory for the rule of law.
It sounds like the folks in Surprise aren't really crazy about a planned ICE facility, detention center, call it what you will. We've had 1,500 up to 10,000. It seems a little bit vague there, although I think Kristi Noem, the DHS secretary, has kind of sent a letter, I think to Paul Gosar, outlining this. First of all, you sent a letter.
I did. She didn't write back to me.
I was going to say, what did you want to know? What questions do you want answered about this thing?
I had some questions very similar to Paul Gosar's. In fact, I read Paul Gosar's letter, and he and I, you know that he and I don't share a lot politically, but I thought he asked some very good questions. I asked some questions that were along the lines of, is this going to cause a nuisance for this community? And also along the lines of, notice and opportunity for the community to respond to it. We didn't get a response, but I do think that the people of Surprise and the state of Arizona owe the answers to these questions. I'll also say that, I haven't talked about this yet. I'll talk about it with you. Maryland just filed a lawsuit today against a similar facility there under NEPA and the Administrative Procedures Act, the APA, and I'm looking at that relative to this facility as well.
And the claim would be?
Well, I mean, there's certain, when the federal government engages in any large-scale project, they have to follow certain procedures under NEPA, which is an environmental law, and under the APA if this is something that has not been done before or requires certain process. So we're looking at that, and we're also still looking at the nuisance aspect of this.
Let's talk about that public nuisance law and exactly how that would apply in this situation, especially since this is a federal facility. It's almost like having a military base in the middle of Surprise. It's a federal facility.
I mean, it's insane when you think about it. I mean, the idea of just plopping a giant prison suddenly with no notice to the people of Surprise, in the middle of Surprise, that could house anywhere, as you said, between 1,500 and 10,000 people, and all of the attendant things that go with that. Wastewater, water usage, traffic patterns, changes in traffic patterns, emergency services, an impact to the hospitals in the region. You don't just do these things without notifying the community and giving them an opportunity to respond and making sure that it's not a nuisance to the community.
And as far as that public nuisance law is concerned, your critics aren't pleased with the way that you're using the law. They're saying you're using it as basically as a cudgel. Do they have a point?
I don't think so. I think I'm using it to protect the people of Arizona, and that's my job. I enforce the laws of the state. We have a nuisance law in Arizona that says that you're not allowed to engage in activities that cause harm to the broader community. and you're not allowed to harm the quiet enjoyment of your neighbor's property. And so we're using that, I think, in appropriate ways. As you know, we sued the Saudis in western Arizona for using an enormous amount of water to grow alfalfa. Here I'm looking at it related to this giant ice facility in the middle of Surprise.
You also went after, I think, a dairy farm in Cochise County. A recycling plant, I think, is planned down there as well. I don't know if they're going after it as yet, but I think that's the point. I think people are saying, where's the negotiation first? It sounds like it's shoot first, ask questions later.
Not really. I mean, we do extensive investigations before we file these lawsuits. I worked on that Saudi case for 2 years. I hired a hydrologist. In the case of the Riverview Dairy in Cochise County, we settled with them. They came to the table, brought solutions to the table for the community whose wells they had dewatered. And we got them to put up $11 million to help those people down in that rural community re-drill their wells. And we also got them to agree to fallow 2,000 acres of land to try to allow the aquifer to repair itself.
But I should mention that the state representative from that particular area, he's thrown up 3 bills now, basically, to try and rein you in.
Yeah, it's really weird because it's his community that I'm helping. It's his constituents who were calling out, pleading for help. And I don't know why he doesn't want to help them. I don't know why he wants to stand up for big corporations that are harming his constituents. But I am going to stand up for his constituents.
Okay, but last point on this. Again, his I think what he was saying was, where's the negotiation first as opposed to...
Well, he might not have been paying attention to what was going on down there and what we were doing, but we basically negotiated for a year and came up with a really, really important, groundbreaking deal that I think will serve as a template going forward for other communities that may be hurt.
I can't let you go without commenting on your comments regarding confrontations with ICE agents. We haven't had you in since you made those particular comments. The governor, basically, what were you trying to say? Because it sounds like the questions were legitimate. What do you do if you don't know that someone is an ICE agent?
Well, I mean, look what just happened in the last couple of days, Ted. We just saw a whistleblower on Capitol Hill come out and say that for ICE, he had worked for ICE, no longer does, and he came out and told the whole world that he was instructed to secretly train ICE officers to violate the Fourth Amendment. In other words, to break down doors without a judicial warrant. And what I was trying to do was to say, number one, it's not okay for the federal government to violate, or anybody to violate the Fourth Amendment. We don't do that in the state of Arizona in America. And number two, that is a dangerous situation, right? It's a dangerous situation. Also to have federal agents wearing masks in a way that you can't identify them. That is not real policing. Real police officers don't wear masks.
But law enforcement agencies are basically saying that what you said was irresponsible and it was too much.
Not all law enforcement agencies.
Not all. But some were saying it's a little too much and it will only inflame what they call a combustible situation.
Well, I think I called it a combustible situation.
Sounds like everyone's calling it a combustible.
I don't know why it's not a combustible situation when you have, ICE being trained to break down people's doors and violate the Fourth Amendment. That is a terrible situation. I mean, I've been asked by, people, what do I do if that happens? My answer is call 911. Call 911. Now, if somebody is breaking down your door and, you have every right to call 911 and call my office as well.
But Arizona has that stand your ground law. And that's where things got a little...
I guess it was controversial for me to point that out. I don't know. You can explain that to me.
But the governor basically said that you should retract those statements, that those were not necessarily the smartest things to say. What do you make of that?
I think she maybe forgot to watch the video that I put out in which I clarified my statements and said that what I want is to protect local law enforcement and to protect Arizonans by saying, we don't accept violations of the Fourth Amendment and call 911, and we want a safe environment where law enforcement, protects the people of Arizona.
So when the Arizona Police Association basically says that, essentially said, what you did was dog whistling. It was dog whistles, that it's okay to assault police officers, it's okay to shoot officers. How do you respond?
It's so outrageous. It's so ridiculous and outrageous. And I think the overwhelming response to those comments by them was, come on. People knew what I was saying, and people know that I want to protect law enforcement and that I believe in local law enforcement, and that I want to make sure that ICE is not violating the American Constitution.
Could you have stated it a little differently?
I mean, perhaps, but I think then I clarified it multiple times. I'm not sure how many times I need to clarify that statement, but I think I just did for about sixth time.
Okay, all right. Police liaison resigned. What was that? Was that about all this?
You know, I can't talk about that. That's a personnel matter.
Okay,
So we'll leave it at that.
So he resigned, but you, okay.
Yeah.
Last question here. Are you still hearing that ICE is ramping up or prepared to ramp up operations in Arizona, in which case your comments would be of note?
Yeah, I mean, we can see that they're ramping up because our office is literally right next door to theirs. So we share a landlord with ICE, believe it or not, and we share a parking lot. So in between their building and our building is a parking lot, and I can see them ramping up. We can see them bringing in more bodies, more people, more cars being delivered, and they're definitely ramping up in Arizona.
What can the Attorney General of Arizona do about that federal operation?
Look, here, I can continue to make it clear that we will not accept violations of the Fourth Amendment, that I don't think they should be wearing masks. I'm the top law enforcement officer of the state of Arizona. And I can also say this. Even though ICE is ramping up, Ted, what is happening is that Donald Trump is taking DEA agents, FBI, ATF, HSI out of Arizona to send them to places like Minneapolis and Washington, D.C. and L.A. To run around after hardworking landscapers and gardeners and do immigration enforcement in the interior of the country, when those FBI and DEA agents should be right here in Arizona helping me fight the Mexican drug cartel. So Donald Trump is making Arizona less safe from a law enforcement standpoint because he keeps taking all these agents off of the border. Like, this guy has actually lost sight of border security. It's interesting.
Well, it could not be argued that they're not needed down there anymore because that situation isn't what it once was.
Are you kidding me? 50% of all the fentanyl seized in the United States over the last 3 years has been seized in Arizona. Of course they're needed here. I mean, this is, the fight against the Mexican drug cartels is right here in Arizona. And I'm on the front lines of that because I do 80% of the prosecutions against the Mexican drug cartels. And yet they're taking DEA agents and sending them to other parts of the country. Those DEA agents normally would be here helping me fight the cartels. They can't anymore because they're running around after gardeners, landscapers, and maids.
Arizona Attorney General Kris Mayes. Attorney General Mayes, good to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ted. It's good to be with you.
The Daughters of the American Revolution are descendants of those ancestors who fought for American independence. Now, when I say we have proven that lineage back to the American Revolution, we do that with genealogy from a person of today to that person who fought for the American Revolution. In the 1900s, it's easy because we use birth certificates and death certificates. In the 1800s, it gets more difficult using wills, Bible records, and other documents to trace our family trees to the American Revolution.
I'm Chef Mark Charbel. Welcome to Check Please Arizona, the show where Valley residents recommend their favorite restaurants. In this episode, we're enjoying seafood, American fare with a Latin twist, and Italian dishes.
Everybody was like looking at me like this is the greatest thing I've ever eaten.
My boyfriend had the Baja Shrimp Burrito, which was so huge and hefty. Also had French fries in it.
So good. Yeah.
I just need a moment. Watch Thursday at 7 p.m. on Arizona PBS.
For centuries, Arizona has been a magnet for treasure hunters.
So what is geocaching?
From the early prospectors chasing the glint of gold to today's geocachers navigating with satellites and smartphones, people have scoured the land hoping to uncover something hidden. No matter what you're searching for, though, hiking Arizona's trails is a treasure all its own. Watch Thursday at 7:30 p.m. on Arizona PBS.
February is National Heart Month, and with that in mind, we look at one of the largest pediatric heart care providers in the country. It's Phoenix Children's Center for Heart Care, and indeed, it's the largest provider of pediatric heart care in the Southwest. To learn more, we welcome Dr. Andrew Papez, Division Chief of Cardiology at the Center for Heart Care. Doctor, good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
you betcha. Thanks for being here. And give me a better definition of the Children's Center for Heart Care.
Well, we care for all facets of children and young adults with congenital heart conditions, acquired heart conditions, and inherited heart conditions. The Center for Heart Care encompasses not just cardiologists, but surgeons, intensivists, anesthesiologists, nurses, everybody coming together on one team to care for that group.
How much change in pediatric cardiology have you seen in the past year? It sounds like the medical profession overall is exploding. Same thing with kids?
Same thing with kids. Congenital heart disease is the most common congenital malformation. With 1 in 100 babies born have some type of congenital heart disease. Most of that is not particularly serious, but about 25% of that group have life-threatening congenital heart conditions that require intervention in the first hours to days of life.
Wow.
Over the last 30 years, the mortality in that group has dropped by half.
Wow.
And that's all due to research and innovation in the field.
Yeah, I want to talk more about the research aspect, but I guess the research aspect is involved with diagnosis, treatment, care, all of this, right?
Absolutely. It used to be the cardiologist's only tool was a stethoscope. And then somebody realized that the heart gives off electrical waves. And then pretty soon we added some ultrasound to it. Now we can freeze the heart in a CT scanner, show an MRI of the actual heart beating. The things that are coming down the pipe are even more exciting.
Is that clinical research a major part of what you do?
It is. Two aspects of what we do. Clinical care is the bulk of it, but then at the same time, we're always asking ourselves, what can we do to make this better? We collaborate with our colleagues around the country at other heart centers to join forces to find those better solutions.
So there is collaboration then. I was going to ask about how much collaboration is done.
Oh, absolutely. There are very limited numbers of cardiac centers, even throughout the United States, but in the world as well. It's a very small community. Everybody knows everybody. Even the physicians and the providers here. We all trained, most of us trained at other places, and we bring those ideas and that experience here to a giant mixing bowl of innovation for the kids.
Yeah, best practices, and that's the best example. You mentioned adults from before birth through young adulthood and even beyond. How far beyond?
Well, we take care of patients in in their 50s, 60s, 70s.
Wow, why is that important? How does that work here?
Well, you know, people focus a lot on the word pediatric, you know, pediatric cardiology or Phoenix Children's Hospital. What we do really is focus on congenital heart conditions. And so these are conditions that people are born with, and they never go away. And so it's important to have someone caring for these patients who understand the journey that they've been through, because that helps anticipate the challenges that they're going to face later in life.
I was going to say, I would imagine there's more to it than just the clinical research and the hard medicine. There's also that psychological, that social, the counseling. That stuff is important as well, is it not?
100%. And it's not just for the patients, too. I mean, we take care of the entire family. You know, fortunately, there are kids that are in and out of the hospital in a day or two. But we have some that are there for weeks, months, or, you know, sometimes over a year. When you're there that long, it's not just the care of the patient, but the care of the family. They're giving up a lot to dedicate their lives and rearrange to take care of that patient. The least we can do is help them out in that journey.
Are there symptoms that parents should watch out for? Just overall general symptoms to be aware of?
You know, there are the typicals: chest pain, fainting, things like that. I almost think more importantly, though, is that sixth sense, when you know there's something wrong with your child. Or if you're the patient, you know, wait, that just wasn't quite right. Paying attention to that sixth sense and seeking care and getting it checked out is more important than even the chest pain, the feeling faint, the other symptoms that people list.
Well, Doctor, congratulations on all your work and all the success there at the center. It's great work, and we're proud of you, and on continued success.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You betcha. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.